As the story of Ubbe progressed, it became plainly evident that he was more than simply a warrior. He was a symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope in a world that was seized by upheaval. This became abundantly clear as the narrative took shape. The more the story progressed, the more obvious this became. Additionally, despite the fact that his story would eventually be lost to the haze of time, the legacy of Ubbe, son of Ragnar Lothbrok, would continue to remain. This is because his story would be passed down from generation to generation. An unconquerable spirit of those who had the courage to fight fate and build their own destiny would be a testament to the fact that it would be a true testament. This would be a testament to the fact that it would be a true testament. The events of the narrative of Ubbe take place in the 9th century, close to the height of the Viking Age. There were many separate kingdoms in England throughout this historical period, and each of them was competing with one another to increase their territory and their spheres of influence. As soon as Ubbe and his brothers sailed across the North Sea and made contact with the English shoreline, all of these aspirations of the English kings and lords would be put to an abrupt halt. Ubbe and the Great Heathen Army would wreak havoc across all of England during this time period, and he was documented as a prominent player during this period. Ragnar Lothbrok was a man of unparalleled bravery and cunning, and he was a warrior whose name instilled fear in the hearts of those who were his rivals. He resided in the harsh regions of old Scandinavia, where fjords carved their way through the soil like jagged scars and stories, were born in the middle of the clash of steel. Ragnar Lothbrok was a powerful and courageous individual who possessed an unrivaled level of cunning. Ragnar Lothbrok was a man who was well known for his reputation for an ability to manipulate and deceive other people. He was noted for his ability to do both. From one generation to the next, stories of Ragnar's heroic deeds were passed down from one generation to the next because of his immense popularity. In the halls of kings, these stories reverberated, and tired travelers would murmur them over campfires as they passed through the night. In spite of this, there was one narrative that stood out more than the rest when it came to the various accounts that were told about Ragnar's conquests. According to his son, Ubbe, the legend that he narrated was as described. Ubbe was a warrior unlike any other because he was born from Ragnar's blood and was raised in the harsh environment of warfare. This made him different from other warriors. This made him exceptionally qualified to engage in combat. It was with wonder and reverence that those who fought against him invoked his name, whereas those who confronted him did so with fear. The very mention of his name was met with awe and veneration. In the midst of the tumultuous landscape that was the history of the Vikings, Ubbe carved out his own route with the support of his father's might and his own ruthless desire. His name became synonymous with victory all over the world, from the shores of faraway countries to the frigid plains of the north. His name became a household name worldwide. As time went on, the name Ubbe became well known. His triumphs in battle were immortalized in the songs of skalds, and his accomplishments in battle became the stuff of legends. His wins in battle went on to become legendary. When it came to fighting, his achievements were the stuff of legends. Even in the midst of the clangor of swords and the thunder of the sea, there was a depth to Ubbe that only a select few were able to comprehend. This was the case despite the fact that everything was going according to plan. The feeling of honor that he had was stronger than any flame, and it was not just a feeling of loyalty to his brother and sister, but it was also a feeling of loyalty to his family. The Viking Age is a period of time that is a witness to an era of exploration, conquest, and cultural exchange that left an everlasting effect on the history of Europe. As they emerged from the Scandinavian territories that are now known as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, the Vikings, who were known for their terrible reputations and famous longships, set out on journeys that would have a profound impact on the development of nations and resonate through the annals of history. This turbulent time period was characterized by the presence of people of mythic proportions, with Ragnar Lothbrok being the most renowned of these figures. The rise to greatness that Ragnar experienced was both extraordinary and unusual, given that he was born into obscurity. His early adventures, which are veiled in the mists of myth and legend, show a man who was both crafty and ambitious, and whose drive for glory knew no bounds. There are as many stories about Ragnar's victories as there are stars in the night sky, and each one is more fantastical than the one that came before it. Ragnar's name became synonymous with victory and horror in equal measure as a result of his brazen displays of courage on the battlefield, as well as his daring attacks on faraway coasts. Ragnar's strategies, on the other hand, were characterized by a strategic genius that distinguished him from his contemporaries. This brilliance was evidenced by the chaos of warfare and the clash of swords. The lineage that Ragnar left behind, which consisted of sons who would carry on his name and his legacy long after he had departed into the realm of myth, is one of the features of Ragnar's tale that has endured the longest. First and foremost among these sons was Ubbe, a warrior whose brilliance on the battlefield was comparable to that of his legendary father. Ubbe's father was the legendary king and raider Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar was famed all over the North Sea, and due to his status as a warrior, warriors and women alike would naturally flock to him. He would lay with an unnamed peasant woman who he had fallen in love with. He would court her by inviting her to banquets and being kind to her. The unnamed woman would soon give birth to a son, and Ragnar would name him Ubbe. When Ubbe grew up, however, he cast off all respect for his father. This would soon change, however, as Ubbe was more like his father than he knew. Restless, eager, and keen for an adventure. Although Ubbe's origins are still shrouded in mystery, much like those of his father, his actions are recorded in the annals of history with a clarity that belies the passage of time. This is a testament to the fact that his actions have been chronicled. As one of Ragnar's most trusted lieutenants, Ubbe played a crucial part in expanding the scope of the Viking kingdom. He led raids and conquests that struck fear into the hearts of their adversaries, which resulted in the advancement of the Viking Empire. But Ubbe was more than simply a warrior. He was a leader in his own right, commanding the respect and loyalty of his fellow Vikings with a charisma and power that few could match. Ubbe was a leader in his own right. His great sense of diplomacy off the battlefield was the only thing that could equal his strategic ability on the battlefield. He was able to forge alliances and treaties that enhanced the power of the Viking Empire. On the other hand, despite his formidable skills in the field of combat and his political acumen, Ubbe remained a figure of mystery, with his true reasons and objectives being known only to himself. There were rumors that he wanted to transcend the legacy that his father had left behind, seeking to establish an empire that would endure for all of eternity. The assertions of others suggested that he was harboring a more profound and personal grudge against those individuals who had harmed him in the past. Ragnar Lothbrok and other legendary individuals began to emerge as emblems of the audacity and ambition that characterized the Viking Age. The beginning of the Viking Age marked the beginning of an age that was marked by extraordinary exploration and conquest. One must, however, dig into the mysterious depths of Ragnar's early life and rise to power in order to comprehend the significance of Ragnar. There are numerous versions of Ragnar's birth, and these accounts vary greatly depending on the source. Ragnar's roots are veiled in myth and folklore. Some people assert that he was born of noble lineage and descended from the gods themselves, while others maintain that he was a mere farmer who rose to fame by pure force of will because of his determination. There is one thing that is certain, regardless of the facts, and that is the fact that Ragnar was destined for greatness from the minute he took his first breath. Ragnar distinguished himself from his contemporaries by exhibiting a sharp brain and a strong desire to experience new things when he was a young man. People from all around the world heard stories of his adventures, and they captivated the imaginations of everyone who heard them. Ragnar's adventures, which ranged from daring excursions in the wilds of Scandinavia to audacious invasions on faraway lands, contributed to the growth of his mythology with each passing day. Ragnar's capacity to motivate others around him to achieve greatness was the driving force behind his rise to fame. It was not merely his bravery and cunning that brought him reputation. The promise of glory and wealth beyond their wildest dreams drew men to his banner, and they flocked to it in massive numbers. Ragnar went on a series of bold exploits that would transform the political landscape of the known world. He started out with his devoted band of followers by his side. However, despite all of his achievements, Ragnar was not devoid of any shortcomings. It was not uncommon for him to come into confrontation with his fellow Vikings due to his voracious desire for power, and his contempt for tradition and authority garnered him a large number of adversaries in addition to admirers. But despite everything that happened, Ragnar never wavered in his resolve to establish a country that was deserving of the mythical reputation he would eventually achieve. The vast breadth of Ragnar's accomplishments is one of the features of his legacy that will endure the longest to this day. Ragnar's name became linked with victory and fear in equal measure as a result of, among other things, his early raids on the coastlines of England and his famous conquest of Paris. Nevertheless, Ragnar's strategies were distinguished from those of his contemporaries by a strategic genius that stood out in the midst of the bloodshed and turmoil that was associated with combat. However, the lineage that Ragnar left behind is possibly the most significant legacy that he left behind. It is not the conquest of nations or the collection of money that he left behind. In addition to being a warrior, Ragnar was also a father, and his sons would carry on his name and his legacy for a very long time after he had passed away, and been relegated to the annals of history himself. In the midst of the turbulent history of the Viking Age and the swirling mists of Norse mythology, there is one individual that shines out as a beacon of courage and endurance. This figure is Ubba, the son of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. Ubba was brought up in the fires of conflict and adversity, and it was his father who taught him the methods of fighting and leadership. He also ingrained in him the principles of honor, bravery, and loyalty. It was clear that Ubba was destined for greatness from the moment he learned how to handle a sword. However, Ubba's greatest power was not just his ability to fight, but also his capacity to motivate others around him to achieve greatness. He was able to command the respect and loyalty of his fellow Vikings through his charisma and authority, and they would follow him into combat without any hesitation. The Viking warriors, which were led by Ubba, developed into a strong combat force that was capable of capturing even the most heavily guarded cities via their efforts. The name Ubba became synonymous with victory and horror in equal measure across the globe, from the icy beaches of Scandinavia to the sun-drenched kingdoms of the Mediterranean. The heroic deeds he performed on the battlefield have been written down in the sagas and songs of the Norse people, making them the stuff of mythology. Ubbe's military campaigns were distinguished from those of his contemporaries by their unrelenting ferocity and strategic brilliance, both of which made him different from his peers. Although Ubbe was leading his Viking warriors into combat, he was able to strike dread into the hearts of his adversaries. His appearance on the battlefield was a sign of impending disaster for those who had the courage to stand against him. Ubbe's invasion of the British Isles, in which he led a terrifying army of Vikings in a series of raids and conquests that would permanently alter the course of history, is considered to be one of the most famous wars that he ever conducted. There was a path of destruction left behind by Ubbe's men as they ravaged the English countryside, beginning with the sacking of Lindisfarne and continuing all the way through the siege of York. However, Ubbe's ambitions did not stop with the British Isles. He set his sights on wider conquests, and he led his men on daring excursions across the seas to the borders of France, Spain, and other places beyond. Ubbe's name became synonymous with fear and wonder in equal measure with each new campaign that he participated in, and his legend continued to grow. But probably the most significant victory that Ubbe achieved was during the siege of Paris, when he led a Viking force in a daring assault on the city that was surrounded by fortifications. Ubbe's men were able to breach the city walls, enabling them to unleash a wave of havoc and destruction. It was not long before Ragnar would begin making preparations for an expedition to the Hellespont, which is a body of water that serves as a border between Asia and Europe. Ubbe would respond to his father's summons to war, and Ragnar would call for a group of Danes to be gathered together. This would result in the union of the father and son. During their time of raiding, Ubbe and his father, Ragnar, would go through a lot together. Initially, they would conquer the ruler of the territory that was located near the Hellenic peninsula, who was known as Ruler Dia. In contrast, Ruler Dia had formed an alliance with a Russian ruler, and when Ragnar saw the vast force that King Dia had assembled, he realized that confronting them could result in his death. Ragnar then devised a strategy to place horses on wheels, which might effectively indicate that he had the horses harnessed to chariots in order to break through the enemy line. This was Ragnar's alternative to fleeing the battlefield. During the course of the conflict, the enemy line was breached, and the Vikings would go on to commit a massacre on the Russians and their allies. Ubbe would spend the next 5 years working alongside his father, Ragnar, and other Viking warriors to engage in raiding and roving warfare. At this point, he had demonstrated that he was a veteran of the military and a fierce warrior. As Ubbe returned home, he had undergone a remarkable transformation. He now had a radically different perspective on life as a result of his extensive travels around the world. After traveling to a great number of various kingdoms and regions, he had come to the realization that power was the only means by which one could acquire anything. Soon after, he would get the opportunity to meet his grandpa, Esbern, who would attempt to persuade Ubbe to assume the kingdom that his father had previously held for himself. Ubbe would listen to the poison that was being spit in his ear, and then he would give in to his own egotistical wishes. It was at this point that he would imagine himself wearing a crown on his head. In an effort to convince the Earls of Sweden to abandon Ragnar and support his cause, Esbern would attempt to bribe them, but his efforts were fruitless. It wouldn't be long before Ragnar learned about this betrayal. After traveling to the location where Esbern lived, he approached him and then proceeded to kill him himself. He severed his head and placed it on the prow of his ship when he had done so. A message to all those who would be deceitful. Ubbe, Ragnar's son, would go away, but he would soon return with a significant number of warriors who were loyal to him. In the future, Ubbe would fight a war in Zeeland against the forces of his father. As a veteran military commander who was unrivaled in combat, Ragnar would easily burst through the ranks of the Ubbes, and he would begin attacking his forces from all directions. However, Ubbe was not capable of being slain. As a result of his killing of a large number of the adversary's troops, he was surrounded by a heap of dead bodies. In the end, he was taken captive after he was finally unable to withstand the increasing number of forces belonging to the adversary. Eventually, Ragnar and Ubbe would have an emotional reconciliation, and Ubbe would be reinstated to his former position as one of Ragnar's sons. Ragnar would be pleased with its outcome. As a result of this, Ubbe vanishes from the annals of history. However, he reappears once again with a single goal blazing in his heart: to exact revenge for the death of his cherished father and to set England ablaze in the flames of vengeance. In the middle of the 9th century, Ubbe and hundreds of other Vikings set off on a trek across the oceans in the direction of the coasts of England. This marked the beginning of Ubbe's quest for vengeance. Alongside his fellow soldiers, Ubbe's ambition had no limitations as he set his sights on avenging Ragnar's death and establishing Viking control over the English kingdoms. He was attempting to accomplish both of these goals simultaneously. Using East Anglia as their centre of operations, Ubbe and his fellow countrymen, under the leadership of the crafty Ivar the Boneless, spent the winter gathering essential intelligence and resources in preparation for their assaults on the English kingdoms. When Ubbe and his fellow Vikings were laying the groundwork for their campaign of retribution, it was a time of cautious planning and strategic manoeuvring throughout the preparation process. The conclusion of Ubbe's methodically constructed schemes was the invasion of the Kingdom of Northumbria, which marked the beginning of the end. The Vikings, who had their sights set on King Ella, poured their wrath upon the English people, who were unaware of what was going on. Their desire for vengeance drove them to commit acts of violence that were beyond their comprehension. The ritualistic blood eagle that was performed on King Ella was personally carried out by Ragnar's sons, including Ubbe himself. This was done in order to seal their vengeance in blood and fire. Ubbe's reign of terror over England began with the conquest of York, but it was only the beginning of his reign. Once the Vikings had the city under their control, they used their ruthless techniques to instill fear and dread in the minds of the English people. This ensured that the English people would obey and submit to their authority. On the other hand, Ubbe was aware that in order to keep their hold on power, they needed to take a more covert strategy. In light of this, Ubbe and his brothers came up with a cunning plan to oversee England while remaining in the shadows. The installation of a puppet monarch, Egbert, as the public face of English rule allowed them to exercise power and authority behind the scenes, assuring Viking domination while simultaneously maintaining the image of English sovereignty. Ubbe and his brothers were able to exercise their control over the lands that they had acquired without provoking any suspicion or resistance. This was a stroke of political genius on their part. In the midst of everything that transpired, Ubbe's leadership and cunning shone brightly, directing the Viking conquest of England with a firm hand and unyielding purpose. Ubbe's place in history as a legendary figure of the Viking Age was cemented as a result of his resourcefulness in coordinating the retribution campaign and his political savvy in government. Together, these two factors assured the success of the Viking expedition into England. Ubbe emerged as a formidable leader during the time that the Vikings were attempting to establish their rule over the northern parts of England. His unrelenting pursuit of conquest left a trail of blood and ruin in its wake. Ubbe's drive for supremacy reached a turning point in the year 869, when the mighty heathen army under his command secured a significant victory in the conquest of the Kingdom of East Anglia. This victory marked a turning point in Ubbe's campaign. As soon as they had the kingdom firmly under their control, Ubbe and his brother Ivar turned their sights on King Edmund, the ruler of East Anglia, whom they considered to be a potential challenge to their goals. Ubbe, and Ivar were infuriated by King Edmund's unwavering commitment to his Christian beliefs, and as a result, they humiliated him by torturing him and ridiculing him. Edmund was held captive by his captors and subjected to severe beatings while chained to a tree. His persistent faith served as a beacon of resistance in the face of the oppression that was being meted out by the Vikings. But even as he prayed to Christ for strength and bravery, Ubbe and Ivar remained unmoved, their hearts driven by hatred and revenge. They did not show any signs of improvement. Ubbe and Ivar beheaded King Edmund as a final act of cruelty, which is a tragic witness to the ferocity that these two individuals displayed during their rule. Ragnar's sons were persistent in their desire for power, and as a result, they resulted in the destruction of ancient families and the plundering and pillaging of nations. With each new conquest, more territory in England was brought under their control. In the aftermath of the murder of King Edmund, who was frequently regarded as a martyr, Ubbe and his fellow Vikings installed yet another puppet ruler for East Anglia. This time, the puppet monarch was a man named Oswald. On the other hand, as the pagan army continued its march throughout England, fractures started to form within its ranks. As a result of the absence of Ivar from English history, Ubbe's campaign underwent a significant transformation, which ultimately resulted in the disintegration of the once unstoppable Viking armies. Ubbe was left to command his own company of soldiers alongside Ragnar's sons, and he faced fresh obstacles as he attempted to keep the momentum of their conquests going. Wessex, the final stronghold of resistance in England, became the target of the offensive operations of the heathen army. As a result of the Viking conquest of Wareham in 875, King Alfred the Great was compelled to go into temporary exile. During his stay in the marshlands, he worked to regain his strength and get ready for the inevitable conflict with Ubbe and his warriors. Ubbe's armies arrived on the shores of Countisbury in the year 878, bringing with them 23 ships and 1,200 warriors, with the intention of besieging the stronghold of Kernwit. But the approach that Ubbe employed, which consisted of waiting for the castle to surrender due to a lack of resources, ended up being his undoing. Ubbe's soldiers were taken off guard when the West Saxons emerged from Kernwit on that fateful morning. They then unleashed a vicious offensive that resulted in the deaths of over 800 Vikings, including Ubbe himself. During the pandemonium of the battle, the West Saxons were able to seize Ubbe's raven banner, which was believed to be imbued with the terrible spirits of pagan idols. This further solidified their victory. The death of Ubbe inflicted a terrible blow to the heathen army, which accelerated the final collapse of the army and paved the way for Alfred the Great's triumphal return from exile. After southern England was brought together under his banner, Alfred was able to restore his domains and usher in a new age that was marked by stability and prosperity. Nevertheless, in the midst of the successes and tragedies that have occurred throughout history, there is one mystery that continues to linger. What would have happened if Ivar, Beorn, Sigurd, Vitsuk and Ubbe had remained united? They were able to capture the northern sections of England, but would their ambitions have finally led to their downfall? Would they have been able to conquer the entire country of England? Please leave your opinion below in the comments section, and if you find this video interesting, please like and subscribe to continue exploring ancient history with us.